Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone. And now, here's your host and CEO of Rue Global Impact, Deborah Rue.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. And today is GAD. It's Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Now, the episode is going to come out in the United States Labor Day, but today is GAD. So we always want to celebrate accessibility because the good news about when something is made accessible, it actually improves the usability for all people. So very excited about my guest today. I've been following Jordan's work for a long time. I noticed her because she was putting out such powerful content, and then we started engaging on social media, and I just wanted to make sure that y'all knew who Jordan was because she's really doing beautiful work. So Jordan is the CEO and founder of the Resource Key, and she is also a speech therapist. And I loved hearing a little bit about her background and how she really walked and got engaged into these conversations. So Jordan, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for having me. I'm going to do a quick visual description. I am a Black woman. I have my hair in a high bun. I have on pink headphones. I'm wearing a orange tank top with a navy blue and white blazer. I'm sitting in an orange and white geometric chair, and behind me is a blue and gold painting. Thank you so much for having me. I want to say that I've been following your work for a really long time and just admire the work that you do and your leadership. And it's really paving the way for so much related to all things disability, inclusion, accessibility.
Oh, thank you. And I'll do a visual description too. I have gray and white and purple hair, and I have on a black blouse and a funky little multicolor necklace. But thank you so much for being on the program, Jordan. You caught my attention because the robustness of the content. And I just love the content that you're sharing and that you're creating. So tell us more about your journey. How did you get here? You started as a speech therapist, and most speech therapists are not running their own companies. So tell us more about the journey and how you got to where you are today.
So I've been a speech language pathologist for the past 11 years. And one of the biggest things just from observing and also listening to the adults and children that I work with over the years was the lack of feeling included in the community. And with the speech therapy, it's a lot of times I work predominantly in the school setting and some private clinics. And a lot of it is really confined to the therapy room, or you're seeing students or the adults that you may be working with in maybe another setting. I would say my biggest learning experience was when I worked at the School for the Blind. And there, even though it was a school it was out into the community, it was residential as well. And we would get to see our students in different environments. And it was very much an eye-opener because now we're no longer in the therapy room, we're in different environments from a cafe or a work environment. So that I feel was definitely a game changer in the sense of I'm seeing other things that are not related to my goals that are bigger than just let's work on this goal. And that's when I really wanted to make an impact. I had my daughter, she's 3 now. And that's when I said social media is where a lot of people spend most of their time. We follow different people and get content and news from social media. And I think that was like a great starting place. So that's how the Resource Key was developed, really, as using social media as the tool to make an impact and being able to educate and share content and information, as well as be able to provide lived experiences through disability leaders that I partnered with through the Resource Key that are in different industries. And that's how I got started on this journey.
Wow, which is powerful. And as the audience knows, I have an adult daughter with Down syndrome. And when Sarah was diagnosed at 4 months old, which is unusual, but they diagnosed her at 4 months old as having Down syndrome. The first thing that happened, which was beautiful, is all these resources that stepped up, occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists. But actually, the speech therapists, they were the most beneficial to my daughter. The only problem that I had, though, was she was benefiting from the therapy, but the problem was that she got to meet it was so infrequent. She would meet like once a week with a speech therapist for 30 minutes, and there would be like maybe 2 or 3 other students in there. And there was progress made, but not as what I would really have liked to have seen made. And I'll also say that my husband sadly has late stage dementia. And we also brought in speech therapists, occupational therapists, and physical therapists to see how they could support him. And we got the most support from the speech therapist, even to the point where she was doing things that I typically would think of an occupational therapist doing, working on my husband's, looking at his feet, how he was feeding himself. And it was just very interesting. And I think one thing that we need to do a better job of is bringing our occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech therapists into these conversations, because I often see that not happening. And so I was just wondering if you have seen the same thing, and that was part of the reason that motivated you maybe to do more.
Yes, that's exactly, you nailed it. I think just from my schooling, and it definitely could be different now, but it's really more from the medical lens, and also to, all right, we're going to structure these goals based on whatever maybe the setting is. So if it's in the school, it may look a little bit different than maybe a private clinic. And it's really, there's like a disconnect. Like I said, the best place when I was in that helped me to learn was when I was out in the community, and then we're going back to the school, and the goals that maybe I would have worked on just if I was in a school environment, not taking into consideration the community, look completely different. I would say, no, we don't even need to be working on this. This isn't very much a functional goal that's going to help 2 years down the line, or even a year, when this child or adult goes to work, or if they're a child transitioning into the workforce, or whatever it may be. So there's definitely, I think, a disconnect, not only from just that side of things in terms of it being goal oriented, which I think is important to have goals, but it's also just as important for me, from my perspective and my learning and professional background, to see the bigger picture of even down to the smallest things. Like I worked in different settings where maybe there was more access to resources. So let's say we're working on something in the school, but then it carries home, and maybe the child doesn't have a computer. Like, how is this even functional? Or so I think it's really important to have those experiences and to be having these conversations across different disciplines, so that not only the therapy side of things, but it's the connection of what's going to happen 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, always thinking ahead, because the goal that you may be working on today may not be as functional or relevant if you're looking towards maybe 5 years down the line. And I think it's important for that awareness piece. Accessibility is another one. I knew nothing about website accessibility or whatever it may be. The field of speech language pathology is so broad that you may be working with, it depends on the adults and children that you're working with and the clients that you're working with. And yeah, it was an eye-opener to me in terms of, I looked at access in a different way, like in accessibility. So maybe if I'm in a school system that maybe doesn't have as many resources, or students that may not have access to certain things at home, or access to, so it was like the way that you're using vocabulary changes based on your clientele or your experiences. So that's like another big piece, is the accessibility is huge, because that carries over. The School for the Blind, I learned so much, and just the resources were very limited in terms of a lot of the books and things like that, we were creating a lot of tactile books for our students and things like that, because there's not really a lot out there. And 3D printing was just coming around, so we were starting to explore that as well. And then when you have multiple disabilities as well, so looking at that and accessibility and just all of those different factors. So I think it is really important to have these conversations across disciplines and across different environments as well.
I agree. And working with people that have different lived experiences. Your lived experiences as a woman, as an African American, as a speech pathologist, you bring a lot to the table that needs to be heard. And of course, representation matters. So we have to be very deliberate right now about including people. I was just on a panel for the Ukraine celebrating GAD, and somebody was asking about how do we assure that data that we are feeding into our artificial intelligence is accessible and inclusive. And another speaker was saying we need good, clean data sets and really be conscious of it. And I totally agree with it. And I said, but please have a woman at the table, and even better, a woman of color, or a woman that's part of the LGBT, or a woman with a disability, because all of these lived experiences provide such value in the innovations and the product development and service development and solutions. And so I think that's another reason why I've always been so intrigued with the work that you're doing. But Jordan, give us some examples, because I've read a bunch of your articles, but give us some examples about your work and the kind of work you're doing and what you're taking on in your clients and things like that. Because as you also said before we went on air, I was telling you a little bit about what we're doing with Billion Strong. And you said it's so interesting how everybody's taking different pieces of this, because bottom line, there is room for everybody at the table, everybody. And it's very important that the voices look and are heard and seen differently. So let's explore that a little bit.
Yes. Oh, the bulk of what we at the Resource Key is the social media. So making sure social media is inclusive and accessible, because there maybe someone's focusing on website accessibility, and that's super important as well. But then maybe you have that same company, you go over to the social media, and that's not maybe inclusive and accessible. So working with companies regarding what makes social media accessible, what are some of the different strategies. So really working with the marketing teams, providing the information through trainings or advising, and really empowering them, working together and starting small and then continuing to add on, because that's also super important. That, all right, why are we doing what we're doing? So not just, you need to do this, but this is why you're doing this, or this is why it's really important, and giving different scenarios. So that's a huge piece of it, as well as creative photography for campaigns or advertising, just fun and like from a different lens. I think I've always really stayed in touch with like my creative side and how I perceive things. And I also too have partnered with community experts, which are different people with lived experience with different disabilities in different industries. And that was one of the first things I did before even launching the Resource Key, was reaching out in hospitality, arts and entertainment, different areas, because that's ultimately really important. It's not just one industry or, like I said, one setting. This is carrying over to all across. And that's another big piece of the Resource Key, is just like the educational piece. We share this stage. I will sometimes speak, or I'll tell them, hey, this opportunity is open and it's in hospitality or in this area. Would you be interested in being like the speaker or whatnot, and making the introduction, or maybe we'll do something together. We've done different speaking engagements for like church. We even did one at the church in terms of how to make things more accessible and be more inclusive in church. So it's all different areas. It's definitely not limited in terms of the educational piece and the settings. We've done recently ergonomics. That was a one that we did recently. And I think it's great, because I think one coming up, Global Inclusion Forum, sharing the stage with another leader in the community, and she's incredible. So that's a big bulk of it. So the social media, and making inclusive and accessible, and working with the marketing teams, different maybe campaigns too, and then also to the educational piece and going out into the community and sharing the knowledge. With me, I'm non-disabled, but I have my own experiences as a Black woman, and then anyone that I'm working with, the community experts having their lived experiences. And I think it's important with different disabilities too, because that's the other piece. It's not just everyone has the same disability. And even if you have a similar disability, it presents in different ways and people have different experiences. So I think that's also important, because sometimes I think that can get overlooked. Oh, okay, I've got it down. So now I know everything about if I'm working with someone that's blind. And I think that's important for companies to understand too. And that's the importance of communication and continuing to listen and have conversations just like we're having.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. I remember my old company, Tech Access, 90% of my team were technologists with disabilities, just like today, over 90% of my team are people with lived experiences with disabilities. But what we would do, we would always provide testers. We did a lot of testing of accessibility of websites and stuff. And we would always provide testers that were blind, that used screen readers, that were just amazing talents. One of the guys, they used to call him Mr. Jaws because he was just so good on the Jaws screen reader. But we would also include testers that were more novice users that were blind using technology, because not every person that is blind is Mr. Jaws. It's like the human experience. We're all different. So I thought that was a great point. Also, I was also on Text Helps Festival of Accessibility, really celebrating GAD. And they asked the question about accessible social media. And so what they did, Jordan, was some of the other speakers eloquently explained that, you do this to make sure this graphic is accessible, and you do this and this. But what I said, because to me, accessibility, I look at it in a very broad global way. Yes, we have to have websites accessible. Social media has to be accessible. But everything, all technology, ICT, internet, communications, and technology, everything should be accessible, and all human beings benefit from that. And so technology needs to work for humanity, and humanity is diverse. And thank goodness we're diverse. And so I just wanted to mention that. But they asked the question, which I thought was a great question, how do you make social media more accessible? And so I explained this in 3 different ways. First of all, we as a community need to make sure that we continue to engage with these social media platforms, encouraging them to be more accessible and more inclusive. And you can do that. You don't have to get on there and bite their heads off. You can do it and have meaningful conversations. But what we see often is that, and I won't name any platforms, but there's one very major social media platform that was very accessible, and then something happened and they're less accessible now. And so just because a platform is accessible, sometimes they become less accessible. So it's ongoing. And so we have the responsibility to make sure our voices are heard and that we're encouraging these brands to include us. And I know your work does that a lot. Also, brands, corporations, this question was asked for, how do corporations, manage social media accessibly? They need to understand that every single one of these platforms handle accessibility a little different. So to make a graphic accessible in this platform, you do XYZ, but to make it in this one, you do ABC. And you have to understand, you have to hire talent that understands, hopefully has lived experiences even better. And then, of course, the third one, which I know you're also very interested in, Jordan, which is why your work caught my attention, is how are you talking to us as a community? And are you addressing these conversations in a way that embrace our lived experiences and our intersectionality? And once again, the representation matters. You and I both have the she and her and hers. And you were very conscientious about explaining your description. So there's so many things as leaders that we can do to continue to enhance these conversations. But the answer can't be make sure you know how to make sure that your posts are accessible on Twitter. It's much bigger than that. Much bigger than that. So I just wanted to bring up those points. And once again, that's why your work caught my attention. So we're still surviving COVID-19. And what was interesting and frightening and sad as we started rushing home to stay safe was that 40% of children in the United States did not have access to education. And even during all of this, people with disabilities were the losers. They got less education, they got less inclusion. It's just really sad. And then, of course, we see what's happening in developing countries, and it's horrible. And that's why we all have to continue to work together, and why I focus so much on looking at these topics from a global perspective, and why it takes all of us. But there has also at the same time been some beautiful benefits that have come out of the pandemic. People now know how to get online, accessibility. I find that these platforms really work better for me when they're captioned. I know, because captioning is wonderful for people that are deaf and hard of hearing, but actually it helps all of us understand your message better. And so I remember I felt like the biggest nag in the world. I would be saying, make sure that everything's accessible, make sure and I'm always nagging about it, but we actually saw what we've been saying for years and years. If things aren't accessible, people get lonely, they become isolated, they're not included, and society loses. The people lose, but society loses as well, because we don't know what you could contribute unless you let us contribute. So what have you seen during the pandemic that gives you hope about the future?
Yes. So I've seen more time for people to sit down and just really listen. And maybe before, because whether it was just being busy or just having a lot of moving pieces, that I think is huge, because that's like half the battle a lot of times, is like being able to sit down long enough to take in information and then processing it. So I think that's been something that really has been refreshing and gives me hope. As well as I've seen even with some events, like going to event coming up, and I've seen more, do you need any, please let us know if you need any accommodations or to be able to, and I didn't see that as much previously when I was signing up for events that were not specifically related surrounding accessibility or disability, or so I think that's really has been really awesome. As well as being a little bit more flexible. I think with COVID, the pandemic, it's forced us to have to be a little bit more flexible. And I think that's going to be really important as we're looking to the future in terms of all of these conversations, is being flexible, because things change, things come up. And that is, I feel like, the core of accessibility too, is being flexible, and not only in your mindset, but be flexible in, different situations, because something may come up and you're going to have to shift, and that's going to be important as well. And although I think the flexibility really came in relation to like businesses in terms of, we have to switch or do something different, I think it has had an impact and carried over in terms of mindset as well. So
Agreed.
Those are the things that I would say.
And I also am very hopeful about teleworking, because my teams have been teleworking forever. And I always found it interesting that employers think that they need to see you to make sure you're working. Well, if you need to see me to make sure I'm working, you hired the wrong person, because hire me because you know that I'm a professional and I care about my work and I have very good work ethic. But it's also interesting to me because I'm much older than you, obviously. I'm over 60, and that's cool. I love being over 60 because I've learned a lot. But there's just some downsides to it too. But that's a whole nother story. But there's so much that I've watched. I remember early on when we had the dumb terminals, there was this man that I knew that he was constantly not working. By the way, your coworkers all know who's working and who doesn't. We all know. But what he would do, he would play solitaire. And then if somebody walked by, he would put something on a screen to hide it. And then before that, I saw somebody we were always on computers. They would have a book in front of them that was a business book, but as soon as the boss walked by, they would move it and they had a cartoon book. So there's so many ways that people aren't going to work that they're not going to work. but that's not the way we manage our talent. So I'm glad that we're learning these things. But also, you were talking about speakers. One thing that I'm doing, I'm blessed to be invited to speak a lot. And so what I'm doing now, and I've been doing this for years, is I'm saying, do you really need me to speak? Or are you sure you don't need Jordan to speak? And so I'm being very deliberate about giving the microphone to other people to give my seat. And sometimes it freaks the people that are planning it out, and they think I'm trying to get out of it. And it's no, I just think that representation matters. And I'll give you two examples. So Dr. Lamondre Pugh, a lot of people have heard he's amazing and so talented. He's the CEO of the new nonprofit Billion Strong, a man with lived experiences as an African American, lives in the South, and also a person with lived experiences with disabilities, a wheelchair user, and amazing talent. But I was invited to speak, and I'm not going to say who, but for a very large communications organization. And I said, I think you should have Dr. Lamondre speak instead of me. And they're like, no, we want, and I said, no, you actually on this topic really should have Dr. Lamondre. And I had to fight him on it, but they finally agreed to it. And then he goes and he blows everyone away. And another example, I was speaking at an AI event, and I really felt that Rosemary Musacchio, who is our Chief Accessibility Officer, and a person that has lived experiences with cerebral palsy, and she's nonverbal, so she uses technology to support her voice being heard. Brilliant, brilliant, talented woman. And so they sort of were fussing and I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And I just kept pushing and saying, you need to have her voice. So at the same time, I was worried about it, Jordan, because I almost bullied them into including her, and I wanted to make sure the technology would work. So we were just being really ridiculous about it and having all these backups and a backup to the backup. And so we start, it's a panel, very talented woman. We had the CAO from AT&T there. We had a very talented leader from Microsoft. And then we had Rosemary, who's nonverbal. And so we had pre-recorded her answers using her device, her technology device. So the first question I go to answer, she uses her head pointer to start the answer speaking, and it didn't work. And I was like, oh, so we're panicking. We're fixing it in the background, bringing up our second. So the second backup didn't work, but the third backup did. But what was beautiful about it was we got the answer out, and then I kept going on with the panel, and then it worked fine after that. But the audience was amazed to watch her troubleshooting on the fly with her head pointer and her eye gaze technology. And they saw what and it wound up being the most powerful part of it, which amazed me. So I like, once again, this is why I feature people like you, Jordan, on my show. I want the world to know about your voice. And I know you're working hard to open the door behind you for others to come in. But why do you think it's so important that we be so deliberate right now?
Yeah, I think that's super important. That's why I just love your work and love you as a person. But I think what you said is really important, because the first is using like your platform, your leadership, your years and your connections to be able to open the door and provide based on your work ethic and your that initial point of contact pretty much. And that's can be the hardest point, I think, a lot of times when opening doors or just getting your foot in the door or trying to get a job or any of these different things, is that initial point of contact or getting the experience, or, hey, you don't have enough like experience or whatever it may be. So I think that's really important, as well as the introduction. And I think that's something that is really key. Yes, people have different types of disabilities, different experiences, but this is what this person brings to the table. They have excellent, incredible talent. They are a leader in this area, this space. And I think that's going to be huge when we're talking about anything related to the future, just like you're doing on a big scale of just like introducing, opening the door. I think that's huge, as well as how you introduce the person, because that's important as well. And then after you get that part, it's the accessibility too, ensuring all of those pieces are in. The second point is the example you gave of just like the troubleshooting of the technology and everything like that, I think having just diverse people on panels that have, I think it's really important, because then that starts to say, oh, this, because people shy away from something that's different that they're not used to, because we get in our bubble or our comfort zone or whatever it may be. And I don't think sometimes it's always, oh, I don't want to like connect with this person. A lot of times it's, I don't know, like I'm uncomfortable, or I don't know where to start. Or so I think having just continuous panels where we just have like diversity within those panels is going to be really important as well, because that's going to allow other people to say, oh, hey, like it's okay. And I think that goes back to a lot of times people will do things a lot of times if they see other people doing it, or it's accepted, and not that what's right or wrong, it's however they approach things. But I think a lot of times, more especially in the times that we live with social media trends, all of these different things, and more is coming at us, we go towards what we see on an ongoing basis. And I think if we see diverse panels on an ongoing basis, it will carry over and trickle into other environments too, like work and all of those. But I think the introduction is huge, though. How you introduce someone, email or not, and I think is huge, because it's their knowledge, the person's character, their personality, their interests. There's so many other things that make up a person that are not only their disability. And I think that's important. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sharing some of the things that I do too is if sharing the stage, if they're open to it, but also to like what you said, oh, this person may be like a great fit and this, and you're right. A lot of times people are taken back and they're like, I emailed you, like I'm not emailing.
No, but I have a responsibility to make sure others. And I believe sometimes I'm invited to speak, and it happens all the time. I'm invited to speak because I'm brilliant, because hopefully that's it, but because I'm a woman. And so often the panels, because I'm on a lot of global panels, so a lot of the global panels are all white males. And so I'm invited to speak as the woman, but I want to see more diversity than that. So yeah, please include women, but I want to see brown and black panelists, and I want to see different represented. And like you said, don't think that you just include one person with a disability and whoo, you're done. Let's have a variety. Let's have more voices being heard. So I just think the work is so important that we be really deliberate about including others.
Yeah.
Jordan, I know, believe it or not, we're already out of time, but I want to make sure the audience knows how to find you. And so I want a couple of things. I want you to tell us what your website is, where you are on social media. But I would also be interested, and I assume my audience would be interested in too, and what kind of clients do you work with? Because we have a very diverse audience all over the world, but people might be wondering what kind of audience, or what kind of clients you work with. And also, I want to give you the final words too. So let me turn it to you.
Okay. So you can find me on my business website is theresourcekey.com. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of those social media platforms. So you can follow us there as well. You can follow me personally on LinkedIn, I would say, because I'm very active on there, as Deborah knows. And really right now, the Resource Key, we just launched recently. So we're very much open to small businesses work with. Right now, we're sponsoring our an event this year for disability food art exhibit. So that's going to be really a fun one.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely be sharing more about that as that comes up. But we're very open to different size companies and industries. It's open. The biggest focus though is, like I said, the social media piece in terms of working with the marketing departments and in that capacity. So that is the main focus. And so that's what I would say with that. In terms of final words, I would say there's so many different things I feel like to learn just from anyone that you come in contact with. And I think that's important. That one of my biggest mottos has always been, no matter how long I've been in a space or a field or whatever it may be, I'm always open to learn new things and new approaches. And I think that's going to be really important as we continue conversations. I know DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion is so big right now in terms of within companies and things like that. But I really think there has to be something that's it's to be sustainable. And really, it's going to be sometimes in the smaller things. There's so many great trainings and programs that roll out, but it's really what happens thereafter and how can we sustain this, not just in the moment, not just the week after we're energized and feeling like ready to implement everything we've learned. So I think it's going to definitely take taking little by little and implementing on a consistent basis, and not just rolling a whole bunch of things out, but not being able to sustain, because that's going to be really important in terms of consistency and how we move into the future. Because really, businesses are not sustainable without inclusion, accessibility, equity, diversity, any term that you may be using, because that is the core of human beings. That's what I would have to say. I think when it becomes embedded and it becomes just part of company culture, society, all of those different things, that's when I think we'll be there. So we have
a little.
Yeah.
But until, we have to be deliberate.
Yes.
To include each other. We have to open the door so that others can join. I remember one time I was saying that, and I was saying sometimes you have to give your seat up to someone else. And somebody's like, no, pull more chairs to the table. The reality is there's only a certain amount of chairs, including wheelchairs, that can sit around a table. So sometimes, no, you actually have to be deliberate and give up your seat. And I know that I'm doing that, and I know others are doing that, but I think we need to be more deliberate about it until it's more commonplace. But right now, it's not going to be commonplace for a long time. So we as consumers have to think about it too. If you see somebody doing a webinar and there's no diversity to it, push back. That we're seeing it happen. We're seeing men push back and say, no, I'm not going to do it if there are no women. We're seeing women like me say, no, I'm not going to be part of this. There's no diversity. Be deliberate. And sometimes we have to worry less about, oh no, but the world will forget about me. No, let's just do the right thing so that we can make the world a better place for more people. And I just appreciate your work so much, Jordan. I think you have a very powerful voice, and I highly recommend you as a vendor and as an entrepreneur. And I just think that the world needs to know what you're doing. And so I was really honored and proud to have you on today. So thank you, Jordan.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. And we'll make sure all of her links are included, but please connect with her. Please follow her. Her work is powerful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I always enjoy reading her posts, and her content is very powerful. So I highly recommend her. So thank you, Jordan. And thank you to the audience, and special thanks to my producer, Doug Foresta, who makes sure that everything works perfectly in the background. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work, brought to you by Rue Global Impact. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your audio. To learn more about Rue Global Impact and the services we provide, visit rueglobal.com. To learn more about how you can become a sponsor of Human Potential at Work, email David at rueglobal.com. That's David at rueglobal.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back next time with a new episode.